Today, we're digging into the absolutely harrowing story of the FV Alaska Ranger, its tragic sinking, and the truly incredible rescue mission that unfolded against all odds in the brutal, freezing waters of the Bering Sea. Okay, picture this. It's 2:52 a.m. on Easter morning, March 23rd, 2008. This is the desperate call that crackles over the radio waves, kicking off one of the biggest and most challenging rescue operations in the entire history of the U.S. Coast Guard. And just to set the scene, think about this number, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature of the water that 47 crew members were about to be thrown into. And if that wasn't bad enough, they were dealing with 20-foot swells and a biting air temperature of only 12 degrees. For one crewman, a fish processor named David Hull, the fight for his life started before he even abandoned ship. His immersion suit, the one thing that's supposed to save you from hypothermia, was already full of water. It just shows you how dire things were from the very beginning. So how on earth did a disaster like this unfold so incredibly fast? The Alaska Ranger was a huge ship, a 19-foot floating factory. But in a matter of minutes, a catastrophic flood started in the stern. The alarms went off, but it was too late. The ship lost all power, and the crew had to scramble onto the deck as their vessels started sinking beneath them. As the ship took a violent, sudden list, the deck became a literal sheet of ice, tilted at a crazy angle. Crew members were shouting at each other, just desperately hanging on to the frozen rails, trying not to get swept away into that dark, churning sea. The captain gave the final order everyone dreads: abandon ship. But trying to launch the life rafts, which were crusted with ice, was pretty much impossible. So the crew had to make a terrifying choice: jump for your life, straight into the pitch-black, freezing ocean. So now you have 47 people scattered in the freezing Bering Sea. An enormous rescue operation kicks into gear, and it becomes a desperate race against the clock. Now, what's amazing here is just how fast everyone reacted. The Alaska Warrior, a sister ship, was 40 miles away and immediately started steaming toward them at full speed. The Coast Guard scrambled aircraft and diverted a cutter. It was an incredible bit of coordination. But the distances involved, they were just staggering. And this map really drives that point home. I mean, look at this. The nearest chopper was almost 200 nautical miles away. The cutter was 130 miles out. Help was definitely on the way, but it was hours away. And for the crew in the water, every single second counted. The first to get to the scene were the Coast Guard helicopters, and when they arrived in the pitch dark, what they saw was just haunting. The ship itself was just gone, vanished. And in its place were dozens of these tiny, blinking lights from the survival suits, scattered across a mile of huge, dark waves. Each one of those lights was a person. That first Jayhawk helicopter crew got right to work, hoisting survivors out of the water one by one. They managed to pull 13 people into the cabin, filling it to its absolute limit with hypothermic, soaked crewmen. And this is where they faced a brutal decision. The helicopter was full, but there were still so many blinking lights down below. They tried to transfer the survivors they had onto the Alaska Warrior to free up space, but the seas were just too violent. It was too risky. That meant the helicopter had to leave the scene and make the long flight to the cutter Monroe, leaving everyone else behind for the moment. But as that helicopter flew off, another form of help was just arriving. The crew of the sister ship, the Alaska Warrior, had reached the scene, and what they did next was nothing short of heroic. So their first plan, using a ladder, was a total non-starter in those massive waves. A freezing, exhausted person just can't climb that. But they didn't give up. They improvised, using their deck crane and a harness to literally pluck people out of the water. Their ability to adapt under that immense pressure saved 22 lives, plain and simple. And look, you don't have to take my word for it. The official Coast Guard report said it loud and clear. The exceptional performance of the Alaska Warrior's crew was vital. Without them, the number of people lost in this disaster would have been so much higher. So as these survivors were finally being brought aboard the rescue vessels, totally exhausted and freezing, the full, devastating human toll of this disaster became heartbreakingly clear. I mean, can you even imagine? These were the moments right after the rescue. Survivors who had just fought for their own lives were now watching their friends being pulled from the water, even trying desperately to perform CPR on their crewmates right there on the deck. It all started with 47 souls on board the Alaska Ranger when it began to go down.
And here's the final tragic tally. By the time the search was over, 42 people had been rescued alive, which is honestly an extraordinary feat. But 5 men, including the captain, the chief engineer, and the mate, were lost to the Bering Sea.
But what's so incredible, right, is that even in the absolute terror and chaos of the sinking, the crew of the Ranger was looking out for each other, waking guys up, helping them get into their survival suits, and just giving each other encouragement against totally impossible odds.
Of course, after a tragedy like this, the big question is always why. The investigation that followed looked at everything: maintenance records, inspections, the whole shebang, to figure out the chain of events that led to that flood, all to make sure nothing like this would ever happen again.
The sinking of the Alaska Ranger is a profound tragedy, no doubt, but it's also this powerful testament to human resilience. It shows the incredible training of the Coast Guard, the selfless heroism of the Alaska Warriors crew, and that unbreakable spirit of people fighting for each other in the water. It really leaves you with a question, doesn't it? When everything falls apart, what is it that makes us help each other, even when our own life is on the line?